Good evening, happy Friday, everybody. Today we want to talk about, I'd like to talk about herd immunity. Another term for herd immunity is community immunity. Herd immunity is when a population builds antibodies to an infectious agent and becomes immune to that, and that immunity spreads through the community as the virus or infectious agent spreads through the community, and more people develop those antibodies. More and more people in the community develop immunity to this. So eventually, when enough people have the antibodies against an infectious agent, then that virus dies off and no longer is infecting that population, that group, that town, that state, that country. There are those that debated whether or not we should allow herd immunity with regards to SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes COVID-19. And here are the issues with that. Number one, to get there, we would not have shelter in place. We would not have people wear masks. We would allow everybody to intermingle as normally would. And the virus will spread from person to person to person in the expectation that antibodies will build up person to person to person. Once a certain percentage of the population develops antibodies, and those antibodies are effective at protecting the individual, then it is said that that community has herd immunity. With herd immunity, as the antibodies are building up, as more and more people are getting exposed, we would have to accept a certain portion of that community will get ill. Therefore, knowing what COVID-19 does to certain parts of our population, particularly the elderly or people over 65, and particularly people with other underlying medical conditions, that means we'll also have to accept a certain amount of death in our communities. I don't believe that's the right thing to do. To go a little bit further with that, to have a community that has herd immunity, a certain percentage of the population in that community would need to have immunity to actually for that community to be safe, considered safe. I'm going to use New York as an example. There was antibody testing done in an area in New York, and it showed that up to 20% of the population in this one area in New York had antibodies to COVID-19. The number that was required to have herd immunity is about 67%. So let's go over the percentage. So 20% in an area in New York had antibodies, but we would need another 40, 45%, 47% of that population in New York to become infected before we ever reached herd immunity. We know what happens with this virus. We know when people get sick, many die. So number one, we need a good antibody test to prove that people were exposed. And as we talked yesterday, we don't have that. We don't have the accuracy in these antibody tests to be reliable, number one. Number two, even though in theory this herd immunity sounds good, we don't know if you end up with the antibodies. In other words, the expectation is that now you're immune. We don't know yet if you do have the antibodies that you are immune to this. You may have the antibodies, and we could prove that one day, but that doesn't mean you won't get COVID-19 again. So therefore, it doesn't mean that you're not going to spread it. It doesn't mean you're not going to get sick. And it doesn't mean you're not going to die. We do not understand this virus enough to allow herd immunity to take place. What we need to do is do our best to shelter in place. When we can't or won't shelter in place, then we need to wear masks or facial coverings. We need to wash our hands on a regular basis. We need to shower on a regular basis. We need to eat healthy. We need to exercise on a regular basis. We need to build up our immune system that way to prevent us from getting ill from COVID-19. I'm going to give one more example of herd immunity before I go. Sadly, there is a veterans group home in Massachusetts where COVID-19 infected almost everyone associated with that group home. Sounds to me like it was herd immunity in that group home. COVID-19 took the lives of 70 veterans at that group home. That is not acceptable to me in this society. We need to shelter in place. We need to wear protective covering of our mouths, of our face, so that we don't spread COVID-19. Until we have a good medical treatment to prevent COVID-19, a good vaccine, a good medication to protect those who are at risk for death from this virus. Please still take precautions. States are relaxing restrictions on businesses. And I get it, and you get it. Financially, we need to open things up to a certain degree. But it doesn't mean you have to put yourself at risk. It doesn't mean you have to stop wearing a mask or facial covering to stop spreading this around, since up to 50% of us with COVID-19 have no symptoms and will spread it. We need appropriate testing. We need accurate testing. Only then are we going to beat this thing. I'll leave you with that. Happy Friday night. Have a wonderful, safe weekend. Shelter in place as much as possible. When you're not, please wear facial coverings. Wash your hands a lot. It's my privilege to do this every night. It's my privilege to serve you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.